does that mean? Nope, there it is, got it. So we are now live, and eventually that thing will go away. And we are going to begin today. This is our first set of testimony. Last week we had a walkthrough of 236. And today, we're going to have a lot more witnesses next week on this one, but today we have Annette Smith, who's the Executive Director for Vermonters for a Clean Environment. And if you remember, this bill puts some limits on who can appeal and for what reason on the citing of renewable energy projects. And those right now, I think, are solar fields and windmills. I'm not sure, we've got batteries, but I think those are the two main ways that we do renewable energy. So Annette, welcome. The floor is yours.
Thank you. And to the staffer, I'll need to do a screen share.
Yep, you should be able to. Whoa.
Says it's disabled.
Okay. You are a co-host, so you can share the screen.
Okay, very good. Thank you. I just had a bit of drama for the last hour and a half. I had no internet service.
Oh, they said you were having trouble.
Well, it's VTEL, and VTEL is very good, and we hardly ever lose service, but they had some sort of an emergency today. So I was worried it was not going to come back on at all. So
Glad it did.
So you got the screen there, right?
Yes, we do. We see strategic planning.
Very good. Thank you. My name is Annette Smith. I'm Executive Director of Vermonters for a Clean Environment. Thank you for the opportunity to testify on S236. I have titled my testimony, Can of Worms. One correction to last week's walkthrough. This bill is not about appeals. It is about the fundamental right of Vermonters to participate in energy generation development proposals that affect their particularized interest as neighbors, and it proposes to eliminate aesthetics entirely from review of all types of energy generation development projects. This legislation is part of a national trend to strip local control for siting wind and solar energy, based on the premise that we must build out as much renewable energy as possible quickly in response to the climate crisis. With state-level PUC permitting, Vermont already has state-level control. Most states have been siting solar and wind through local zoning. This legislation presumes that neighbor objections are slowing renewable energy development in Vermont, and that solar panels and wind turbines everywhere are good and necessary and should be accepted regardless of the aesthetic impact. Because of our terrain and topography and competing land use needs, Vermont has limitations on development. Lots of rock, water, steep slopes, an agricultural economy, forests especially valuable to address climate change, housing development, tourism, commercial and industrial uses compete for limited available buildable land. This is a fact we all need to recognize. Vermont's aesthetics matter. Vermont's scenic natural beauty is our state's brand with enormous economic value. In November of 2022, Governor Phil Scott stated, Vermont's natural beauty combined with outdoor recreation opportunities are economic engines for our state and a driving force for why people visit and live in Vermont. I am not going to defend Vermont's process for siting renewable energy. I have consistently recommended to this legislature that we change the process to be more collaborative and less contested, bringing our communities and utilities to the forefront for siting renewable energy instead of the developer-driven process. This is just one example of a proposal I made. Here's another piece that I supplied to the Senate Natural Resources Committee last year on the PUC process.
Okay, do we have those there?
You have my testimony that has, I spent some time and I put links into every one of the things I'm going to be showing.
Okay, good, so we can, it's a little hard to read them quickly up there.
Sure, and I'm not expecting you to read things, but I want to lay the groundwork for that I've given a lot of thought to the process, and that if you want to discuss any of this further, there's a lot of information. I'll go back to the pretty picture though. We all need more sunshine right now.
Yes, we do.
Developers choose sites without consulting communities or neighbors who are blindsided when advance notices are filed. Neighbors and towns must learn in a short period of time all about the project, the PUC process, and prepare to put on a case with expensive expert witnesses. Most renewable energy projects in Vermont are not opposed, but there are bad projects that are opposed, and for good reason. Vermont's developer-driven siting process has led to haphazard development with big wind projects sited too far from load, resulting in grid constraints and additional cost to ratepayers, with solar development in places that do not support the grid. Green Mountain Power and Velco have both stated in public that new solar has declining value now. Green Mountain Power has said they don't want more solar unless it is in the right place. I have seen no evidence to support the supposition that neighbor intervention is slowing renewable energy development in Vermont. What I do see is frequent requests from solar and wind developers for extensions of commissioning deadlines due to workforce and supply chain issues. The cost of capital is also a factor. The PUC is granting the requested extensions. Neighbors, aesthetics, and the PUC are not the reason why renewable energy may be slowing down in Vermont. The push to strip regulatory review of renewable energy projects is fueled by anticipated Inflation Reduction Act funding. Yes, Vermont should prepare for an influx of money to support renewable energy development by assuring generation is built in the right places and with respect for our environment and communities. That is not what this bill proposes. Vermont's renewable energy industry and its promoters have been preparing this attack on neighbors and aesthetics for several years after the denial of a 500 kilowatt solar project in Manchester in May of 2021. Bill McKibben rang the alarm on his blog. This is a really long piece, erroneously claiming the Manchester parcel could otherwise host dozens of condos or a warehouse, and telling people they must see the beauty in silicon panels, even though he admits they are not in and of themselves beautiful. Senator Anthony Polina joined the fray soon with a commentary, erroneously claiming the PUC overruled local officials by denying the Manchester solar project. Peter Sterling of Renewable Energy Vermont also mentions a case in Bradford, erroneously claiming the PUC denied a Bradford project on aesthetics. A lot of mythology has been built up around the PUC's decisions. I appreciate the opportunity to provide some facts. The developer dropped the Bradford case after issuance of the proposal for decision, which recommended denial on orderly development and aesthetics, but it never went to the full PUC for a final decision. That project was contested not by neighbors, but by the town and regional planning commissions, a very rare situation where two rivers intervened and opposed it, which they'd been working together to focus commercial development into the limited area of town where public investments had been made, and the solar array would have used up some of that precious land. To the best of my knowledge, out of thousands of certificates of public good issued by the PUC, they have denied 3 solar projects on aesthetics. One in Bennington, which involved finding the project did not promote the orderly development of the region because it did not comply with the town plan. The Bennington situation is best described as a nightmare, as the developer is a lawyer who currently has 4 cases pending against the PUC and 1 against the town of Bennington, all in federal court. The PUC denied 1 solar project in view of Mount Philo in Charlotte on public investment and aesthetics. It was opposed by the town and the Agency of Natural Resources. The Manchester case is the only case denied on aesthetics exclusively, but it had another factor that the PUC said would need to be investigated further: flooding. The PUC denied 1 solar project in the grid-constrained Shiai region due to the grid constraints. I am not aware of any other PUC denials of solar arrays. I am not aware of any renewable energy project that the PUC has denied on environmental issues. The Manchester case is relevant to the discussions taking place in the State House this year about housing, resiliency, environmental justice, and equity. In the Manchester case, neighbors intervened but had no clue how to participate. So they had nothing in the evidentiary record, just public comment that is not considered by the PUC in its decision. The town did not participate or file comments. The site is an open field. This is the site. Across from a housing development. This is a housing development. It has dirt roads. Built for the workers of Manchester. Carpet installer, food service worker, firefighters, water system operators, people who perform necessary services in Manchester live there. And only recently the town agreed to take over all of the infrastructure, including they have their own sewer line. Some of the homes look out on the field with spectacular views of Mount Equinox. The neighbors were concerned about the view, the potential for glare due to the orientation of the panels, and the effect on property values. The solar developer's simulations and testimony indicated the project would not be fully screened for 10 or 15 years. So those are existing conditions. This is when built. This is after 4 to 6 years. And that's after 10 or 15 years. And it's probably this time frame that was one of the reasons for it to be denied. But note these are taken at ground level, and the homes across the road are two stories. So it would be probably 10 years. Of equal neighbor concern was the flooding. There is a reason it is an open field. It floods all the time. The neighbors showed me pictures and videos of floods in winter, spring, and summer. The winter flooding, I think this one was in 2019, resulted in huge blocks of ice mixed with trees in the area of the proposed screening trees and fencing. The field flooded the week before the PUC site visit, with remains of sediment still visible. This was after it was cleaned up. The neighbors had documented something like 4 different flooding events, plus Irene did tremendous amount of damage. The developer's expert, which is the only thing the PUC had in the record, submitted this map inaccurately showing the flooding coming from the west, southwest. FEMA's flood hazard map accurately depicts the flooding, which comes from the north and results from the convergence of the Bourne Brook, that's the Bourne Brook, and the Battenkill. So the floodwaters come down this way at a very high velocity. The neighbors sent me videos, which I tried to figure out how to show you, but it was too complicated. Coming at very high velocity down Richfield Road. They were regularly cleaning out their whole neighborhood. The whole field flooded. In its decision denying the solar project on aesthetics, and I've given you the decision so that you can take a look at it, the PUC acknowledged the flooding issues and agreed that the information supplied by neighbors would need further investigation if they were not denying the project on aesthetics. So this is the case that has apparently created an uproar in the renewable energy industry, and there are other places that I've seen it referenced. Renewable Energy Vermont issued a report in which they claimed that this was outrageous, that this project was denied, and there were real issues and real reasons why it was denied on aesthetics. The PUC already has 2 ways to overrule a finding of undue adverse impact on aesthetics. The PUC has added a 3rd section to the Queechy analysis developed by Act 250 called Societal Benefits. They can also use the public good, also known as general good of the state, to overrule aesthetics issues. I researched the history of societal benefits, and I'm providing you with this write-up of it. It's very interesting what happened. Act 250 has a lot of precedent regarding aesthetics. And there's some detail about it, including the impact on neighboring landowners. Neighboring landowners were always considered in the review of aesthetics. However, between 1996 and 2016, the PUC disregarded Act 250's precedent and did not consider the impact of energy projects on neighboring landowners based on the testimony of 2 Green Mountain Power experts in the Searsburg wind case. where they opined that interested landowners, the neighbors, are most likely to be impacted by aesthetic impacts of the project and therefore have an individualized perspective that's different from the viewpoint of the average person. And that standard was used for quite a while, from 1996 until 2016. In 2016, in a case called Rutland Renewable Energy, the Vermont Supreme Court corrected the PUC's misapplication of the aesthetics criteria, stating that, and this is the last sentence here, the board can and should consider all vantage points, including from private property. In 2016, this legislature passed Act 174, giving towns more say in renewable energy siting if they adopted enhanced energy plans. Many towns have written or are writing these types of plans with special emphasis on identifying scenic resources to be protected. This proposed legislation would destroy all the work planners have been doing during the last 7 years. And I'm providing you with a document I submitted to Senate Natural Resources last year on the status of enhanced energy planning. With that background, I offer the following observations about the proposed legislation. 1, aesthetics is not just about the view of solar projects. Aesthetics requires evaluating many aspects, including open space, character of the area, and noise. Section 248 covers all types of electricity generation and not just solar and wind. Substations, gas pipeline converter stations, gas power plants, biomass power plants, transmission lines, wind turbines, solar generation facilities, a number of which produce noise, which is evaluated under the aesthetics criterion in Act 250. This proposed legislation would eliminate the wind sound rule. Are there aesthetic issues associated with solar arrays? Yes. PCE has fielded glare complaints from net metered projects, residential ones, 500 kilowatt net metered projects, 2.2 megawatt standard offer projects, and 100 kilowatt wind turbine projects. I'm going to show you some pictures which this blinding glare, and this is what can happen. And the developers say it doesn't happen, and so it's not mentioned in the CPG, so there's no way the PUC can hold anybody accountable because there's no violation of the PUC, of the CPG. There's an article from 2018 about the town airing solar panel glare grievances. This is an order from December of 2023 from the PUC agreeing to a change that will hopefully eliminate the glare from panels from the project. What changes to Section 248 criteria would be beneficial? Neighbors would like property values added to the criteria on which they can present evidence. It is the top topic raised by neighbors who learn about a proposed solar project or wind project, and I have to tell them, I'm sorry, nobody cares about your property values. Neighbors would like the PUC empowered to require compensation to neighbors who experience trespassive glare from solar arrays or noise from wind turbines, and provide compensation for property value reduction or unsaleability. Some Vermonters have experienced severe, and I've seen 50% reduction in resale values in some areas due to renewable energy development, with some properties so compromised they sat for years unsold. If this bill passes, we will see more nuisance lawsuits. You can expect backlash, which is happening in the states that are stripping local control. Vermont's Constitution says that private property ought to be subservient to public uses when necessity requires it. Nevertheless, whenever any person's property is taken for the use of the public, the owner ought to receive an equivalent of money. The other issue this bill raises, neighbor intervention opportunities should be expanded. Neighbors are already limited in what they can intervene on. These are all the criteria of Section 248. Orderly development and aesthetics are routinely granted. Environmental issues are sometimes granted. Economic issues are rarely granted. System reliability is never granted. Property values are not considered. To get standing, neighbors must show they have a particularized interest that is different from the interests of the general public. Now, Senator Bray will be aware that the LCAR just passed a rule of the PUC that gives neighbors automatic party status, and I'm aware of neighbors who have intervened, but they don't do anything in the case, and it makes sense to do that. Neighbors would like to intervene on all the criteria, just as towns can. Most neighbor testimony is limited due to the expense of experts and attorneys, if you can find any attorney who will do these cases anymore. And it is unlikely that neighbors would be able to present testimony on all the criteria, but they should have the option to present testimony on issues relevant to a specific proposal if it will assist the PUC in making a fact-based decision. If you choose to open up this can of worms, Vermont citizens who have been affected by energy generation projects have a lot of issues they would like the opportunity to bring to this legislature. Developers are taking advantage of fears about climate change to try to get a blank check for solar and wind development. Please do not let this bill go any further. Vermont has a lot to lose. And I thank you for hearing my testimony and be glad to take any questions or discuss
Thank
things.
you. Senator Brett has a question.
Good to see you again, Ms. Smith. Thanks again for your ongoing research into things. We learn something every presentation. I have just a quick question on the average person test. I had never understood it to mean as a theoretical, entirely average person. I mean, if I was like the offended, I think it's whatever,
Shocking and offensive.
Yeah,
Person.
to an average person, so like a sensibility, but that it wouldn't exclude someone who was an adjoiner because they do have a particularized interest, but I thought it was if they had the sensibility of sort of an average person to it, that they could still weigh in, I mean, otherwise it's like if you have a particularized interest, you're excluded from being average, and therefore it sort of fences you out rather than allows you in a particularized way.
Well, in the PUC's decisions between 1996 and 2016, they were not considering the views from private properties in their decisions that involved their sitting in the shoes of the average person, which was what the Act 250 precedent is about. And so that meant that you might live right next to a parcel where you would look right out and you would be granted intervention, but the developer would not have to consider the views from private property. Now, with this correction from the Vermont Supreme Court, private property must be considered.
Okay, so was the old, for that period of time, is the only test, like someone who was driving by?
I don't, all the big wind cases happened under that. So you find in the decisions that the neighbors weren't considered. It was a very unfortunate period of time, but they just, the people who lived the closest were excluded from having their properties considered at all.
Thank you.
Okay. Any other questions for Annette? Senator McCormick, did I see your hand?
Yeah. Hello, Annette. Dick McCormick.
Hello, Senator.
Don't call me sir.
I said senator.
Oh, okay. I think we agree that there are places where solar collectors, or for that matter, wind turbines, don't belong. And sometimes that's for aesthetic reasons. I've actually helped constituents stop a solar project because it was in a place that really it didn't belong. But what I said to them, it was, and I said in any situation like this, if not here, then where? Because I think we agree that we do need renewable energy. We need solar collectors, we need wind turbines. So if not in a particular place, and I agree there are places where they don't belong, sometimes for aesthetic reasons, then where do they belong?
So there's a new report out of Massachusetts. It was done by Mass Audubon and Harvard Forest that is really excellent and has Environment and Energy had a presentation about it last week on how to shift incentives to building in the right places and away from and disincentivize building in the wrong places. And frankly, one of the things that I said in my testimony just now is that as long as the developers are choosing the sites, we're guaranteed to get projects that don't make a lot of sense because they're choosing the cheapest sites or what's next to a big power line. And um, so there is a case in Middletown Springs called Orchard Road Solar. And in that one, it was a very prominently visible hillside. And there was another site that was possible, and there was a lot of challenge in getting it moved to the other site where it's not visible much at all. And that happened. I mean, I found people are very willing to consider alternatives. But when there are sites like, I don't know, a 500 kilowatt project that takes up only 3 acres, but they want to clear cut 9 acres of a forest, that sort of thing is something that people are not interested in compromising on for good reason.
Do you have any thoughts about used up gravel pits, parking lots?
Oh, yes. I mean, the preferred sites that are in certainly the net metering rule encourage gravel pits. Parking canopies are extremely popular. I learned from that Massachusetts report, they're about 150% more expensive than the building on green fields. But okay, let's figure out how to incentivize that. Whenever I see them, I think it's great. You can put electric vehicle chargers in there. They're protected from heat. They're protected from snow. Um, it makes a lot of sense, and they're very popular. So we just haven't had this conversation about how do we cite renewable energy in a way that creates the right incentives to put them in the right place. But gutting aesthetics and neighbor participation is just not the way to go at all. It's antithetical to everything that Vermont stands for.
Okay, Senator Bray has a question.
Yeah, so on, following up on Senator McCormick's, what's the right place? We made an attempt to address that in the siting law, like towns do plans with a town energy element, get it certified. Towns will, now they'll have substantial deference before the PUC. I've heard that there has not yet been a case where a town was in position to assert that authority in a proceeding, but the goal was let towns decide and steer projects to preferred locations. So
Right, and
what's your experience on, is it working or not working?
it's not working. And I gave you a one-pager on that last year, which I've included in my testimony. I give webinars and trainings to planning commissions. I've given, by the invitation, the Windsor Regional Planning or Wyndham Regional Planning Commission. I gave a presentation for planners. The problem is that what you all did was tell the Department of Public Service to set standards, but none of those standards are relevant to the PUC. So people don't understand that, for instance, the mountain behind me, you can say in your town plan, we don't want wind turbines. But if you don't say, we don't want industrial wind turbines on Susie's Peak, which is what that mountain is, and which had a dozen industrial wind turbines proposed for it, then it's not a clear written standard. The PUC wants specific language for specific locations. It's an extremely challenging standard to meet in the PUC process, because if you want to protect a scenic resource, you have got to provide specific language. And if you want to see the single best town plan that has done this right, it is East Montpelier. Because I think the reason it came about was because a cell tower was proposed there, and there was widespread opposition. And that's the town in which Jean Vissering lives. And Jean Vissering had spent her career as an aesthetics expert. And so sometime in the last year or two, East Montpelier redid their town plan, and their scenic resource protections they're the gold standard. And they have a map, and they have a specific listing of all the town roads. And it's a heavy lift to do, but an aesthetics expert can do it.
So mapping an area alone is not enough you can't draw a map and exclude those mountains in the background and say,
Well,
This-
mapping is good, but most towns don't understand what they're supposed to do, and you have to use the words must and shall. You can have special policies. I just worked with the town of Stamford, which had a special policy in their plan that said that there's a setback of 1 kilometer for an industrial wind turbine. They had exactly what the PUC is looking for. The developer chose to go ahead with the advance notice anyway, even after meeting with the Regional Planning Commission. It turns out all of Bennington Regional Commission has a 1 kilometer setback from residences, but developers are willing to move forward too. That project was dropped, thank goodness, probably on grid constraint issues. So the Act 174, I mean, it has challenged towns. They get these standards from the department that they're supposed to go through, and they adopt all these standards. And I look at the plans and there's nothing in them. Now, some towns have done a good job and provided you have to name the mountains, you have to name the roads, you have to set a standard that can't discriminate against any other type of development. It's for volunteer planners, it's a really challenging thing to do. And I've told the department their guidance is not giving the PUC what it needs to understand what it is the town wants.
well, that's too bad. I think we spent about $500,000 a year, 3 years running. We might have done another 3 years providing technical assistance and training through the Department of Public Service and VLCT so that towns could get up and running with this in a way that was well designed, well constructed.
Even towns I've worked with, I go back and I look at their plans afterwards, and some of them are doing what they need to do and others aren't. And even so, even if it's the plan that gets substantial deference, the PUC can still override it. But yeah, it's been 7 years and we haven't seen any decisions yet based on any of this language. I'm aware of a couple that may be coming along, but it's a very challenging thing. That Manchester case, the town plan had Richfield Road named as a scenic resource. It didn't meet the standard that was required by the PUC to create a clear written community standard.
Okay, we're running up against time, so one more question.
No, just that I'm glad I'm hearing this, and I feel like we should fix 174.
Read the one pager that I've linked here. I gave it to committee last year, but take a look at it because I think I summed it up pretty well.
Okay, thank you, Annette. That's been very helpful.
I hope it was helpful. Thank you very much for hearing from me.
Yes. Okay, thank you very much. Committee, have we got Lauren Glenn on? I'm not seeing her on Zoom yet.
Yeah.
Yeah, here I am.
There you are, okay. All right, committee, we're going on to 181, an act relating to Community Media Public Benefits Fund. And we have a proposal before us to have a $15 fee for every connection from an internet provider to a pole. And we're going to have testimony on how many poles and connections those are. But Lauren, I think it would be helpful if you gave a little history to start with for the PEG program and why it was established and what you do, and has anything changed over time?
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Madam Chair. And hello to members of the committee. It's nice to see you there in person and virtually. And I do appreciate your willingness and ability to switch topics so quickly. So thank you. But we are in the regulatory realm, so I think we're almost in the same country. My name is Lauren Glendavidian, and I'm the founding executive director of CCTV Center for Media and Democracy, which is based in Burlington, Vermont. And I retired from being the boss of things, and I'm now the public policy director. And I'm helping to represent VAN in the State House as we work on our ongoing short-term funding, one-time funding, and a longer-term solution for the support of public educational and government access in Vermont. We're part of a statewide organization known as VAN, or Vermont Access Network, and we represent our members in matters of mutual concern including the effective operation and advancement of PEG access throughout the state. S-181, which was introduced by Senator Baruth, is a companion bill to H-575. It is known as which was introduced by Representative Pat on the House side, and it's known as the Community Media Public Benefit Fund. This would be funded by communication service providers, not just internet providers, but all communication service providers in the state, to ensure equitable and sustainable financial support for local PEG access organizations in Vermont. We have a vested interest in this bill dating back to 1984, when CCTV first negotiated the first PEG requirements with Cox Cable, when they came forward in a rate case before the Vermont Public Service Board back in the day when cable rates were regulated, and there were 50 cable companies serving the state of Vermont. In that year, the 1984 Cable Act was passed as an addendum, an update of the 1934 Communication Act, which drives and covers every activity, every regulatory concern of telephone companies, TV stations, radio stations, satellite companies, cable companies, you name it. It's the 1934 Act. The 1984 Act was an update, Title 47, and the Vermont Public Utility Commission at that time, Public Service Board, was designated as the state's cable franchising authority, able to negotiate the terms and conditions of cable contracts or certificates of public good. These contracts included the public benefits that the 1984 Act allowed, including up to 5% of franchise fees set aside for cable-related purposes, which the state of Vermont, through the Public Service Board, the Public Utility Commission, opted to designate for community media services and not simply put it into the general fund, which is the option, plus a amount that's negotiated over and above the 5% to support capital investment, in addition to what was then 3 channels, a public, an educational, and a government access channel. Over the past 40 years, communities across the state have built an extensive network of these channels and services based on what is written in the statute, a concrete demonstration of community needs and interests. And we have been involved, I think, as you know, in multiple Public Utility Commission dockets. Today, Vermont's 24 community media centers have a complex mission that makes us, as a local media production center and community center, a combination of town hall, local newspaper, town library, public school, and speaker's corner. During the COVID pandemic, thanks to your support, we were identified by the state of Vermont as an essential service because of the role we played in getting public meetings online and emergency information out the door. In addition, the 24 community media centers operate more than 75 cable channels and dozens of internet channels. We employ nearly 100 people in dozens of communities across Vermont. And collectively, between the staff and the volunteer community producers, we produce more than 18,000 hours of television every year. These include, as you well know, live open government public meetings, election coverage coming up this year, education access, community events, sporting events, cultural exchange, media education, and programs on topics that range from race to religion and beyond. We also maintain extensive video archives, which play an important role in the preservation of local identity. For example, in Burlington at CCTV, we have an archival collection of more than 40,000 programs that date back to 1984 that we are in the process of digitizing. And I think it's just important in terms of what it is that we do. Community media centers provide a unique, non-commercial, and community-controlled media resource. So when people say to us, well, we have YouTube, why do we need community media? YouTube is not community controlled, and it is not non-commercial, and it is really part of a media surveillance ecosystem, and that is just the direct opposite of what we do and the services we provide. So much for the history. We're seeking a level playing field. And this is an important idea that you hear a lot in regulatory discussions. Each AMO is run locally by a board of directors and financed by mandated payments from cable companies, the franchise fee, that serve the same service territory. These payments are generated by cable subscribers themselves. For those of you that have cable bills still, you will see the line item, the PEG fee, on your bill. And collectively, between what is now a half a dozen cable companies, generates about $8 million in support of community services statewide. As consumers increasingly cancel their cable subscriptions in favor of internet-based entertainment and news sources, the funding for community media is declining. The trends are clear. Forbes magazine recently reported that the high water mark for cable subscriptions in the United States in May 2011 was 91% of all TV households. That's 105 million households. And today, in September 2023, that's 75 million households, about 61% of the homes. And it is projected that in 2027, the number of households that will have cable TV subscriptions will fall below 50 million. That's only 38%. So that's a very stark trend line because our funding is tied to those subscriptions. In Burlington, at CCTV and Town Meeting TV, which is funded by cable franchise fees, in the end of September 16, the cable company was reporting 19% more revenue than they were reporting in September 2023. So we've had essentially a 19 to 20% decline in support from cable subscriptions. This is not to say that we are not working to diversify our revenue, as are all the other access centers. We are not just thinking that we have to get a solution from the legislature to replace the money just clearly in that way. We are working on a variety of different ways of serving the community, carrying out our mission. And that's, of course, another interesting story, but I'll get to the point of the bill. The steady decline of cable revenue has been a longstanding concern because it's such an integral part of our funding structure. And because, and this is really the gist of the whole thing, there is no corollary public benefit on the internet side. So, in fact, Congress has done its best to tie the hands of cities and states and municipalities, that's a city, in passing the Internet Tax Freedom Act and other kinds of rules, which makes it very difficult, if not impossible, to put a fee on internet service. Hence the PEG study. So in 2020, the legislature authorized a study to be conducted in how we could modernize the tax structure that supported community media. And that study, known as the PEG study, it's got a longer name, the Analysis of the Financial Viability for Public Educational and Government Access TV in Vermont, was released in 2021. And this report is known to your committee. You helped us get that passed, and also you have been reported. But basically, it provided a number of recommendations on how to modernize the telecommunications tax structure in Vermont, including PEG access. One of those recommendations was a pole attachment fee. And that would be a charge on all companies that deliver commercial voice, cable, and internet and wireless services to Vermont homes and businesses. And it would be a fee on the company's physical attachments to utility poles installed throughout the state. And these include poles in the public rights of way and on private property, but does not include wireless macro towers. And actually, I may be wrong on the private property, and I need to double check that. Vermont's newly created communication union districts, or CUDs, would be exempt. Communication service providers would pay this fee to the Vermont Department of Taxes by July 1st of each year, based on every pole attachment they attach to on April 1st of that year. The PEG study estimated 440,000 pole attachments, although we think this requires verification. The proposed rate is $15 a pole a year, which could yield as much as $6.6 million to offset the decline of cable revenues. Cable companies would not be charged twice. They would be permitted to deduct from the pole attachment charge amounts paid under the current franchise fee funding mechanism. The funds would be collected by the Department of Taxes, deposited in a special fund as the Community Media Public Benefit Fund. Each year, the money would be appropriated to the Vermont Secretary of State, who would provide an annual grant for operational costs for the access management organizations administered by VAN. I would just say in closing, because this is a question that often comes up, what about other states? Because Congress has not acted, in fact, we were very active in the 2000s in trying to lobby Congress to act on this question and reform their own communications policies, but we don't see that happening. And every state is very different in how it regulates cable. So in New York State, for example, most of the cities and towns take the cable franchise fees if they charge it and put it towards their general funds. There are some community media centers, and there's a proposal to charge a streaming tax, of which New York State does not currently charge, which would be then split 3 ways between the state, the cities and towns, and the access centers. And there is a comparable plan in Massachusetts where they do charge a streaming fee already, but this would add on to their streaming fee. Those are really the only 2 examples that we're aware of. We chose not to pursue the streaming fee for a variety of reasons. We think that the pole attachment, because it is a kind of real estate rental, gets around the federal limitations on the state's authority to require this type of public benefit. Thank you.
Lauren, Glenn, why did you choose to leave out the CUDs? They are performing the same service, so why are they not being taxed?
It was requested by Representative Sibilia and Representative Pat to exempt them.
Okay, there's been no legal, I'm concerned about equal benefits, that if you're doing the same thing, we're only taxing one of you and not the other, so that would be something. Senator Chin.
Yes.
Hi, Lauren, thank you for the testimony. This is Tom Chittenden. I'm curious about, you referenced other states regarding streaming fees. I don't see, and I'm sorry if I missed it, other states on poll taxes. Is it comparable what our neighbors are doing with the $15 amount? Or did you come up with $15 because your target is 6.6 million for the fund? I'm curious how we compare to our neighbors regarding what they're charging, if anything, for poll attachment fees.
There is no other state or town or city that we're aware of that is charging a pole attachment fee for this purpose. So we are, dare I say, a kind of unicorn. And we chose 15 in response to 10 was in the PEG study, was recommended, but for the purpose of this bill, we thought 15 was closer to a reasonable sum in terms of revenue for access.
Have you given any thought that $6 million is going to be passed on to consumers in another way?
We're very aware of that, Senator, absolutely. The point here is that over time, there will be less of a cost on the cable side, and internet subscribers it will be passed on. Now, just to say, it is the option of the company whether they pass it on. It's not required.
No,
But they do. They do. And so there will be a cost on the internet side that there isn't, but there will be less of a cost on the cable side.
Okay, but we have been having discussions in here about the affordability of cable access and we've been trying to find money so that people can afford it. I'm concerned that if we cause their bills to go up again, that we may not, we may lose subscribers, which in this days of crises and, you know, pandemics and telemedicine could be serious. Kids can go to school on the internet at times. So I think that's a concern that I'm going to want to hear from the providers as to what they think this might mean to their fees. Okay, I've got Senator Ron Hinsdale and then Senator Bray.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I'm glad Senator Chittenden said it once so we don't, again, call this a poll tax. It's a poll attachment fee. And I did have the same concern as the chair about CUDs, just because I do see that as a fairness issue for the end user as well. I mean, they don't have the choice between if they're part of Comcast or a CUD, depending on geography. My additional question was, I mean, and I really support this conversation and trying to move forward with some form of revenue for our public access. I've just gotten really excited about PBS Kids app. It's a streaming service that's on my phone. And I imagine if this conversation becomes quite public, you know, folks who are much more used to apps and streaming services are going to want to know if our local public access as a group are going to try and do the same thing, like partner with Vermont PBS and have a streaming app that makes it even easier and better to access public television.
Do you want to just quick response to that?
Yeah, is that in the
Yeah.
works?
I think,
Something even better.
yeah, I mean, we are, just to clarify, because this is just for the record, is that we're not public television, right? So it's a different animal entirely. And we are all working on different levels across the state to occupy platforms such as Roku or creating apps, or, I mean, getting to customers in different ways. We've been working on distribution on the internet since Governor Dean was governor, and we started to stream his press conferences. So we have been, the point here is that, and I don't think I made it clearly enough in the testimony, is that community media centers have been distributing on the internet for more than 25 years. And so the people that are watching our interactive meetings in the city, it's for the city of South Burlington, for example, are watching as often and probably more often online on the internet as they are on cable. And so this service is being used by people, consumers of this other platform that has no public benefit attached to it. And so the truth is that we know that any public benefit is passed on. I mean, cable PEG fees are passed on. And so, yes, the public benefit would be passed on to the internet subscribers, and they are using the services. So I think it's just important to say we're trying to level the playing field, not by eliminating a public benefit on the cable side to make sure there's no public benefit, but by making sure that the public benefit is distributed fairly across the platforms that are using the service and the subscribers.
Right. Yeah, I'm glad I was able to sort of help you highlight that most people are using the internet probably to watch this at this point. I certainly am. I just think, as you said, you were on the cutting edge of trying to give community media access via the internet. And I think it's, you know, there's an iteration beyond that that's starting to be
Sure.
the popular way people find local media and access it and get push notifications about new meetings that they care about in terms of water quality or, you know,
Yeah.
public safety. So just wondering if you all are contemplating a shared pool of resources so that all statewide community media could get into that space.
it's a great idea. We haven't contemplated that explicitly, but we do work together on technical initiatives. So yes, thanks for bringing that up.
Lauren Glenn, where do I find? Because I've got 200 channels on my TV and they're not local. Or I have some local channels. Where do I find, how do I find where you are in this day of 200 or 300 channels?
Well, it's a good question because we used to be very easy to find. We used to be on the very lowest tier and
Yeah.
15, 16, and 17. And then the only way that we could be found, according to, for example, Comcast, on their program guide, was if we were moved up into the 10,000, the 1,000s. So I don't know what Orca's number is. We're 1083, and we also have a statewide channel that we all share, which is called Vermont Community Television, which is 1087. So typically the way you find it is we go to the website and we say, where's Orca playing? And you can find recorded, pre-recorded things that are running in replay that you can just watch off their site, or you can see what the cable channels are.
Okay, so if I can't find you easily, that means that a lot of your like COVID information and stuff may not be that valuable if the public can't access. It used to be, I think we had 27 channels and you were on 12 and 13. And it was right there but now with 1,000 channel things, I have no idea where Orca is.
Well, and that's honestly, Senator, why the internet is actually an easier place to find us. So if you went and you just typed in town meeting television, YouTube, you would find every meeting that we record for the past however many years.
Okay, but it's on YouTube.
Yeah, you could find it on YouTube, and then you could go to our website and you would see the schedule and you would see where we are, and then you could go find your channel on cable. So it's become cumbersome, honestly. I don't disagree with you at all. That's a whole other sort of side story, but it is harder to find us on the cable lineup than it was before. That is true.
Has that impacted your viewership? Do you have any way to count how many people are watching, and has that changed with the 1,000 channels?
The cable companies won't release that information to us. So we basically track by proxy who's watching online, and that will vary. For example, the town of Essex, if you might see on a regular night, you might see 15 people or 20 people tuned into a meeting, but if there's a gun control hearing, there'll be 1,000.
Okay.
So that's, I think the other thing I would just say to Senator Ram Hinsdale's point is that we do a lot of marketing. So we do push out to people programs that are of interest to them, and we all have newsletters, and we all have subscriptions, and we use social media to let people know. So we're not just hoping people will find us. We're pretty actively marketing the availability of things like this hearing, for example.
Okay. Senator Bray, you had a question, and then we are once again running up against time.
Quick question. Thanks for coming in. You mentioned 440,000. I didn't know if you were referring to polls or active, poll attachments happen each,
Attachments.
440,000 attachments happen in a year, on an average year?
No, it's not new attachments. It's everything that's up there every year. When I first read it, I thought it was new attachments, but it's not.
Okay, so we assess whether it's existing or new. Okay.
So I'm looking out onto the utility poles right now, and their attachments, and that's what we're talking about, the existing ones, which is why, what I think what was an estimate that was done for the PEG study. So I think it would be prudent for us to try to figure out, verify that number again. The fact is that all these utilities are already attached to the pole, so they know what they're attached to, right? I mean, they're already paying a pole attachment fee to the utility companies, or if they don't own the poles themselves. So that's sort of solved the problem of knowing how many, because it doesn't solve the problem of knowing how many, but it solves the problem because the companies themselves know what they're attached to in terms of collecting the fee.
Sure. Okay. Okay, so a single pole, whatever, it might have 3, 4, 5, and each of those attachments would generate this $15 fee from that particular pole. Okay,
Yeah.
thank
Okay,
Not electric companies, right? Just communication companies.
thanks.
Thank you.
okay, thank you. That's it. No, we have one more on this topic. And we're gonna continue going through this topic so that we're prepared. But I was told today that the plan is that this is starting in the House and that it got sent to us so that we can be prepared to deal with it quickly when it comes over, probably in the last 2 weeks of the session. So
I will just say,
Yeah.
now that I'm not driving, it is really bad out there, and I hope everybody makes it home before dark. It's just really messy. I didn't go above 60.
Okay, so we will get Senator Brock out of here whenever he feels it's, and you've got to go too. Okay, so
Thank
we
you so much.
one more witness. Steve, I think I'm gonna have to put you off till the next time because I don't want to lose one more member of this committee.
When is something coming until 3:30?
We'll put you in the
Wait till
Senate Sherman,
3:30.
the Senate Sherman
Ah.
tank will valet driving.
Is
Can you,
Should we not be
can you email him and
It's
see if
safe
he
right home.
can tune in? Is he zooming in?
Yes.
See if he can
Oh,
get.
no, I believe
Maximum
actually
speed
his plan was coming,
28.
which is why.
So you're
So I've got
super
a
safe.
person driving down here. I will leave it to people, if the two long drivers want to take off, I will understand that. With Keisha, I've got a quorum. We definitely have a better body count than last week in the room.
I have a room in town,
Yeah. So I'll leave it up to you. See if you can contact him if he's in the building or nearby. Frequently they are in the building. We will move this along.
On this topic, I recall getting a note from Stephen Whitaker about Doug Hoffer writing up about toll attachment fees and some sort of mandate from others.
That's
that gonna be
in
part
the
of this?
right of way.
Does
Yes,
that fold into some of this conversation?
No.
No.
not at this point.
I know it would be money for some other fund, it wouldn't go towards the PEG study, but I thought it said something about our statute requires us to collect fees for the use of our.
I've been listening to Mr. Whitaker and I understand that there is a fee for poles, all poles, which is generally the electric companies own them, that are in the public right of way.
Oh, electric.
Well, it's for the pole and generally some of the consolidated own some poles, but I think they've sold them. But generally it is the utilities that own the pole, so they would be the biggest payer. Why we don't enforce it, I don't know, but we can ask. Okay, Mr. Whitaker, why don't you come up? We'll see if we can get our next witness.
And if your next witness becomes available, I'll cut mine short for another day. But I appreciate taking advantage of the window here. Just as perspective, I think this is linked to other initiatives. The right-of-way charge is the letter that Senator Chittenden is referring to. That's been in statute for 10 years and has never been collected. That's the letter exchange that Senator Hoffer sent to your, not Senator, Auditor Hoffer sent to your committee.
Yes.
There is also a proposal to clarify the definitions in the telephone personal property tax, because some communications providers are declining to pay that based on their own interpretation of whether it includes them. And so those two alone could generate some revenue. But I also need to call to your attention that as part of the public safety communications planning, I'll look at these other potential revenue sources, because that public safety communications system that's came to your committee last year, stalled, and then was launched as part of the just language in the appropriations bill. That is not just the 9 million and 11 million this year. That's a 10-year, 100 million. And if you count the operation and maintenance over the life of those systems, you're talking twice that. So that's a $200 million over 10, 20 years that we need to anticipate. And so the right-of-way charge, pole attachment charge, a relevant fact that you might keep in mind, Central Vermont Fiber alone has currently $400,000 annual to pay for pole attachments, not including this fee.
Right.
Now, I agree that CUDs should be treated equally to commercial providers. And that would have several impacts. It would force y'all to wrestle with the policy issue of, are these municipalities or are they private businesses? But they've been operating in secrecy. Their financial models, their agreements and cost and revenue sharing with their operators like Waitsfield or Consolidated are all secret. And there's a Supreme Court decision that says you operate like a business or you operate like a municipality, but you don't have sovereign immunity if you're gonna operate.
We're sending that portion of the bill to GovOps because we do not do public,
Safety.
Well, public access.
What I'm suggesting though is that you might want to consider whether these funding sources need to be looked at in a holistic fashion. How much exactly? The CUDs did an inventory of all the poles in the state. Whether that was necessary or a waste of money is up for debate. But that database of poles would give you some counts of pole attachments that could be used to model this proposal.
Mm-hmm.
But looking at the right-of-way charge, looking at the telephone personal property tax, the universal service fund, and the proposed line charge, connection charge, as a comprehensive basket of revenue sources. I agree that public access and community media are important and need a dedicated and reliable source of revenue. I also would like to imagine that you would wrestle with the policy issues of what's the in-kind consideration for that. Are they gonna provide copies of records at cost the way a public instrumentality does? Who owns those recordings that are created with a publicly supported community media organization, but yet they're not in the possession of the municipality? These are policy issues that are necessary to address. I would like to see you consider that the community media centers be, if we're going to support them with both organizational and structural, make them part of our emergency management communications. They could have generators. They could keep the public informed when all the first responders are busy out in the field. They could have low power FM. There's a lot of ways that the community media centers could support emergency and disaster preparedness. And that would be a good reciprocation for a dedicated source of revenue.
First, you have to find out how people can find out where they are without having to go through.
Yeah, a uniform database of that with live links is a simple matter to implement. But keep in mind, this public safety process, if it ever gets underway, it's off the rails right now, in my opinion, but it's going to do a study. Some national experts are going to do a study of those revenue sources in a holistic way. And it may shed more light on that and support this initiative.
Okay, Senator Bray.
Well, I guess I want to say I appreciate you sort of bringing forward all the bits and pieces that are out there happening, because it doesn't seem like an ideal way to manage all those bits and pieces. Sort of keep sort of piling one thing on the other. I'm not sure people are willing to cede their territory in order to come up with an integrated approach.
I can assure you that I walked up to the line of offending another valued witness, by saying it the way I said it. I spoke to her before the testimony and said, I have some concerns about divvying something up before we looked at the whole picture.
And I think we're gonna take the time to look at as much of the whole thing as we can find, which is a good reason. Senator Chittenden.
So thank you, Zane found the letter, and it does have to do with broadband, and it's saying that it should go into the transportation fund and not necessarily to.
That's the letter, yes, it's supposed to go, and transportation is not in good shape, so that would be money that should go there. Because it is the transportation right of way, I believe. Okay, committee, if there aren't any questions, thank you. And how are we doing with our witness?
So he actually emailed me a little while ago letting me know he was gonna be zooming because the roads are so bad.
So let's get him to zoom
I
in.
emailed him, I haven't gotten a response yet, the past 7 or so
Okay,
minutes,
if
but-
the roads are bad, I really would like to have the guys that have to travel know where to go.
I'll listen in my car on Zoom. Can you send me the link?
Do that.
Are you gonna?
Yeah. I'm gonna go off, I can
You
break.
get broadband?
Yeah, let's take a break. Our witness is supposed to be here at 3:30. We're trying to contact him, and get him,